experimental piece today for YouTube. Just going to read through the Substack. All the fancy eye candy video editing effects will come much later on, after I've solved quantum gravity. Weighing in on the units of account. So yeah, Stephanie Kelton wrote this good piece. You can see it here on her Substack. Musk discovers magic of modern money. Well, I mean, Trump, we already knew Trump understood. He's aired that in public. And now, I guess Musk does as well. The US government can't run out of their own score points, IOUs of the state. That's what the US dollar is. And that's mainly because the ledger books and the spreadsheets can go up to any digits you like, up to the software limit. You can enter in any amount they like. All right. So, nevertheless, it's an interesting social phenomena to comment on. And I'll have a few comments. This might go for 40 minutes or so. Because I still think, although we don't really have a clue what's going through the heads of these Nazis, clearly they've always known the USA does not ever need to suffer a financial crisis in US dollar units. They can run out of someone else's score points, but they can't run out of their own score points. So there's never a need for a fiscal crisis. Fiscal crisis would be running out of your own IOU. Well, it can't happen. Excuse the typos. The payments can always be made. It's just a computer entry. They don't have to find the money. There's no magic money tree at all. Magic money tree is a false framing. It frames money as stuff, as something of value. Well, the money has no inherent value. It's a score point. The government imposes upon us a need to get the score point, and they tell us how much it is worth. In other words, the government is always dictating one way or another what we need to do to get their score points. That determines the value, and it's an arbitrary choice. The government policy determines it, not private markets. Private markets can only determine relative prices. Now, it's very messy. It doesn't look like that in the real world. It looks like other monopolists, like oil monopolies and so forth, they can also set the price level. But the government has an overriding power. To understand the more nuanced aspects of that, you need to understand the currency is a gauge system, and the government can always re-gauge the currency and set the price level accordingly, even if there's a foreign monopolist demanding extra score points. Plus, the government can always introduce subsidies. You know, there's all sorts of policies the government does in order to maintain its monopoly over the currency unit, its own score points. The foreign oil monopolies cannot issue the US dollar score points. If they did, I'm sure the US Army would come in and have something to say about it, drive a few battleships up the Persian Gulf. There's never need for a fiscal crisis then. Payments can always be made. So what is the real goal of these Nazis? I think, you know, maybe Grim Reaper scything progresses out of the deep state and so forth. And also, of course, destroying any semblance of democracy you already have. Maybe not much, but, you know, even the idea of democracy is now under threat, the idea that it was a good idea. Well, you know, I have something to say about that. We've never had a democracy. And so you can't say democracy doesn't work or has died, because it was never alive to begin with. So, yeah, there's all that conversation, which is not today, so let me read on. Of course, the other motive is just to align their own pockets with US dollars. Now, why would they do that if their goal is to destroy the US government? I don't think their goal is to destroy government. They want the US dollars in their bank accounts because they understand Congress will always make these score points valuable. They'll always be redeemable. And so the idea is not really to break US government, it's to destroy the democratic elements, I think. Or something like that, you know, read into it what you will. They may also accumulate government score points by pumping crypto or any other things that they can get away with, since they're now in a extreme, unconstitutional, I would say, position of executive power. So basically, it's hardline neo-reactionary stuff with very few moral constraints. There is also no inflation constraint. But I guess that's going to be relevant here, because once they understand once they understand MMT is correct, they can point out that the government can't run out of money, but they can always impose austerity upon the working classes by invoking the inflation bogeyman. So this is supposed to be they, seem to know that the cuts to the government spending can be offset by spending elsewhere in the economy. So you take from one area of the economy and you give to another. And of course, with executive power without congressional oversight, that can be pretty arbitrary. You can go to all the tech bros and everyone else like that, all their friends, crony capitalism, empowered by MMT, which is the terrible, disgusting thing for all us, progressive lefty MMTers. It's like, just tragic to see this happening. Using MMT for basically evil purposes, I would say. I hesitate to use the word evil. It's a relative word, but, pretty much is at the moment in the USA and the UK. Even in New Zealand. People in power are not good people. So I think it's the distribution. They'll be seeking to correct the distribution. Less money to the poor, more money into SpaceX, and so on and so on. So the only thing stopping the clowns who have dim knowledge of MMT will be pretty hardcore counter neo-reactionary activism through and through. The working class needs to mobilize. If we don't, we're just going to be screwed over and over again. Also, check the footnote on Social Security. Where the heck was that? Number 2. So, the government can't be broke. Right. Well, we know this. Not only did Trump admit it, so, in other words, whenever Trump says the government is broke or the deficit is too high, he's lying, and he knows it because he aired his knowledge before. Maybe he forgot that he ever knew MMT or had a dim awareness of it. Who knows? But some of them also would understand Greenspan's comment to Paul Ryan, I think it was, that the government can always pay Social Security payments. There's no question of finding the money. There is no such thing. They just take out a computer at the Fed and mark up the pensioner's bank account. The question is whether the real resources are available in the real economy that those pension payment entries can claim. If they're not there, the pensioners starve, no matter how much money they've got. So there's no trust funds that are needed. But even in leftist circles, we still get this childish, we have to pay the tax to get the Social Security score points nonsense. It's total nonsense, and it kills working class politics. We do not pay the tax in order to fund the government. It's the complete reverse. You and I pay the tax to drain demand. That's reduce our spending power. So that, by design, people are constantly willing to work to get another tax credit, which they just lost because they made a tax payment. That drives real production, and that produces the real output, which the retirees can consume. Hopefully we'll all be someday retired by the age of 40. I'd go even lower. Thing is, whoever's in power needs to comprehend this, whether they want to blow up Russians or Chinese or torture immigrants or otherwise. No matter what their politics, ignorance is never good. I mean, you'd like these people to be ignorant, but I think that's only going to make things worse, because if they want to run wars or anything, they're going to be thinking like the current centrist Democrats. They're going to be thinking, well, I have to get the tax off the taxpayer in order to fund my war. So that sort of ignorance is never good. So with MMT, sure, you can produce on the military-industrial complex and run endless wars. The question is, why would you do that? It's not a question of finding the money. It's a question of consuming real resources to blow up bridges and kill people. So it's not the monetary system that stops that. It's up to us, up to democracy to stop that. And first, we need a democracy in place to begin with. And then, as our mate Grumbine always says, MMT is not a cure for any macroeconomic ills, because a genocide denier can run the payment system to support genocide, as well as guaranteeing full employment and price stability. So full employment and price stability are the key macroeconomic goals, but they're economic goals. They're not anthropological, they're not human, they're not moral. All that layering of spiritual economics is what I try to write about as much as I can. And it goes way beyond MMT. So let's examine this critical meme here that, okay, so these neo-reactionaries understand America can't run out of money. But they say they're out of money. But then they also say now they're saying that the government can print money. In fact, this is actually not really good MMT memeing. I think it's pretty disgusting because firstly, it's not printing money. Money is an IOU of the issuer. So every so-called printing, which is just marking up a bank account, is an accounting record simultaneously of a credit and a debt. So you're not really issuing anything of value because the net value of a credit and a debt is zero. The government owes you redemption, hence will always accept back their own currency. Why would they not? They always accept back their own currency in payment of taxes, fees and fines owed to the state. When the government fails to accept back its own currency, the government is in default, but voluntarily so. There's nothing stopping them making an account entry to delete units from your bank account and credit the government's records of tax payments. Those records of tax payments are not the government's money. They're just accounting records. Right. Well, the need to pay tax, fees and fines to the state are imposed by force and power of the government, whether we like it or not. That's our present. I mean, you may not like that system of government, but that's what we've got. That's what we have to work with. So why is this the critical meme? It's because although the elites know by now that the government can't ever run out of its own score points, these people, the elites, are still going to pull out of their asses the inflation boogeyman every time. The real point is not inflation. Don't get distracted by inflation. Inflation is a total distraction. And I'd even say, well, you know, sort of half taking the piss. It's like a neoliberal psyop. Not that it's deliberate, I think it's just prevailing popular knowledge and misconceptions. It's not an actual psyop. Although, you know, you could imagine it was if you've got that kind of conspiracy-brained mind. So I'm going to predict that they're going to keep on beating the inflation boogeyman drum. And it's all fake. They're going to scream up to the high heavens, to the dumb monetarist death gods. It's a nice anime that Death Note is the one that I've linked to there. Let me not go there, waste time. The real point is that the government power and authority, which I think is increasingly less legitimate day by day, definitely year by year, is what is forcing you into debt. The government then issues the tax credits, which are the only instruments with which you may extinguish this debt. And it's a debt you didn't ask for. Well, I presume you didn't. Probably you might think it's valid since you live in a society, so you have some dim idea that taxes are kind of like a social obligation, blah, blah, blah. That's half true. But note that the government's also in debt. When they issue a tax credit, sorry about the typos, the tax credit is a debt of the government, but it's of no financial consequence because the government can always extinguish this debt. They extinguish this debt when you pay taxes, and it costs the government nothing. It doesn't cost anything for the government to make this redemption because they're not promising you pizzas or gold or anything. They're just saying we will extinguish your obligation to pay the tax. So this is the critical difference between holding a debt in your own IOU and debt in someone else's IOU. The distinction is that really the difference between night and day type of distinction. It's really not the same kind of thing at all. So debt is not a singular meaning word. It means very different things in different contexts. The debt of the issuer of the IOU is completely different to an obligation to owe someone else's IOU. People need to understand this if we're going to have a civil society that is free from precarity and the needless anxiety over mere score points. Why do we have so much anxiety over government score points? Well, at heart it's because people do not understand the monetary system. But even if they did, if they gain power and they prey on people's ignorance of the monetary system, then they can use this ignorance to increase anxiety and austerity and essentially exercise control over the working class. So if your IOU is promising someone gold or pizza or water, you'd better have something near a monopoly on producing those goods. Otherwise, no one's going to take your IOU. Why would they? But the government faces no such problem. Or is it? Well, actually, no, it's not like that at all. The government does face the same problem, but it solves it, whether they kind of know it or not. I don't think there's much theory behind this, except for MMT. They solve the problem by having the full might and power of an army, the police, and the justice courts. Without this monopoly on power, who would want the tax credit? No one. It's only the fact that the government can enforce the tax liabilities that you and I are willing to accept payments from the government. Payments that are exactly the tax credit. So your nation state has ceased to exist effectively if you don't have an army, police and justice system. Unless in some way the government manages to run a grand psychological psyop on all of you, like Argentina, which promises you US dollars. Well, Argentina government can run out of US dollars, so it's kind of a con game. It's also a reason for a lot of their inflation and so forth. Not today's topic. So I don't really like catechisms, but checklist type of things are really good. I know there's these great studies on aviation industry where checklists were introduced. Seemed like a banal kind of thing to do. Pompous pilots and engineers might say, we know what to do, but the checklist actually saved lives. So here's an MMT sort of catechism, sort of checklist to check your understanding. And I'm going to use dollars, so dollar could be anything, any unit, state unit of account, like the yen, the pound, the euro, the Russian ruble, the Chinese renminbi, or whatever. So it goes like this. Every credit is simultaneously an equal debt. That's by definition. It doesn't make any sense to have a credit unless there's also a debt. So the converse holds true. Every debt is equal to some credit. And society cannot function without this. The idea that we can have a moneyless society is complete garbage. It's just nonsense. There's no such thing. Every civil society will have people who owe someone something else for favors or whatever, right? Even if this money is only in your mind. If you owe someone in your mind, you owe someone, a favor, that's money. It doesn't have to be a written record. It can be a record that's kept only in your memory. That would also be money. It's like an IOU. You do someone a favor, you may forgive the fact that you did them a favor. Like you say, well, I just cancelled the debt. You don't have to pay me back. You don't have to return the favor. I'm not asking you to. That would be extinguishing the debt. So the credit and the debt then get cancelled out. Same thing with money. The difference with money, monetary systems, where you have this kind of symbol here, is that it's formalized, it's written down, and that is because basically in a large society of more than a few thousand people, you can't trust everyone just automatically by default. It would be a bit silly to do that. You need written records between strangers. That's why we have formal monetary records. Well, that was a long point number one. Point number two, government imposes tax liabilities. That creates a demand for their otherwise worthless score points. The score points are these dollar things. You and I are now in debt psychologically, even before the tax department sends us a notice. And the government is psychologically in credit because it knows it can find willing takers of tax credits because it's imposed a need to earn the tax credit. Step 3, this creates unemployment. People seeking to earn the state currency. The government can then finds willing takers of the currency, and now the government is in debt. The government issued the IOU. We now have the government's IOU. We are in credit. The government is in debt. However, there's also another credit debt. Remember, what is that? It's the tax liability. We haven't yet paid the tax liability. So we are still in debt to the government, but at least now we're also in credit. By the fiscal year end, taxes are paid. That means both those pairs of credits and debts get extinguished. We now no longer have the government's tax credit, but we no longer have the tax liability until the next fiscal year rolls around, and then the whole thing repeats. So the amount the government spent to employ the real resources in the real economy is the net private savings in dollars. All the dollars the government spent that were not used to pay taxes are private savings. So how much of these private savings should be left in circulation in the economy? Well, it's kind of a hard thing to determine, but there is certainly one thing that can be determined: evidence that the government did not spend enough. The evidence the government did not spend enough is unemployment. Alright, so where's the magic money tree here? Freaking nowhere to be found. And yes, despite revealing he knows a tad about MMT, the Mars King is still a freaking moron. Just the words magic money tree and printing money reveal one still has a mind colonized by monetarist nonsense. These things are not based MMT knowledge. These things are monetarist because it invokes the mental imagery or metaphor that money is something that is valuable. Remember, it's not. An IOU is not valuable intrinsically so. It's only valuable if someone promises to redeem it for something. It's the something that is promised for redemption which is valuable. In the government's case, it's pretty twisted. The government only redeems it to keep you out of jail for failing to pay your taxes. So that's a kind of perverted value. It's like you value your freedom in not going to jail or having the bank manager knock on your door because you're in bank debt because you had to use your credit card to pay the tax. All those things are a kind of negative value, but a positive value is not having the negative value. So that's how the government makes the currency valuable. Right, I still don't think these people in government really understand that all money is simultaneously a credit and a debt. If it's not simultaneously a credit and a debt, then it is not money. It's something else, like crypto or whatever, gold certificates, anything like that. Well, actually, a gold certificate is a promise of redemption. So a gold certificate is a type of money. And once the gold is given, then it's redeemed. Okay, the lie here is in thinking if one has the US dollar, tokens or score points, then one has real value or something like it. But no, that's not true at all. The US dollar is just a credit and a debt simultaneously. It nets to zero value, always. The driver of a monetary economy is the credit-debt split. You may hold the credit, but it's no good to you unless someone else holds the debt and is capable of honoring the promise to redeem. Understand that the driver of the economy is the credit-debt split. Someone has a credit, someone is in debt. The agent or organization that is in debt needs to do something to extinguish the debt. What they do to extinguish the debt is, well, anyone's guess. The idea of a civil society is to make sure that the main or dominant mode of repayment of debt or extinguishing debt is to do something useful for society, for other people. That should be the whole goal of things. Not to, run a scam or cheat people or swindle people or con people. That should never be accepted as a means to extinguish debt. So I reckon dollars to donuts, the Mars King doesn't really comprehend all of this fully. But even if he did, he's still a freaking Nazi. So I don't really care if he groks MMT or not. Although I guess you know, like I said before, it's better if they do, because then his followers, or anyone really who wants to put pressure on government, or, you know, these cronies who are brought in to run government unelected, we can all freely, as in freedom, demand the tax credits from the Clown's King's Congress without thinking that the mythical quote-unquote taxpayer is busy somewhere counterfeiting the score points to supply the government with. Howls of delirious laughter. Yes, the taxpayer has to counterfeit this money to give to the government, otherwise the government won't be able to find the money. It's like amazing that people haven't really cottoned on to this and realised this now. Does anyone ever think about what taxpayer dollars means? Where do these dollars come from? They don't come from the taxpayer. How many times are we going to have to say this before people cotton on? I truly think we're going to have to say this in primary school and kindergarten before it becomes general, conventional, civilizational level knowledge. So it all brings me back to the question is, will the Mars King convince the Clown King to continue gutting the public sector anyway, even though they know it is not necessary, because there's no such thing as a fiscal crisis, and that's the cover that they're using, is that the government is running out of money. So, you know, it could be that they're doing this by deliberate design. They know the government can't run out of money. So I think it's an accelerationist type of experiment. They're driving accelerationism a bit harder than already. You can Google accelerationism and figure out what that means. It's basically death drive capitalism. You know, burn everything to the ground through the vehicle, not of ecological crises, but of just political crises, like ramp things up to an extreme degree so that capitalism collapses and you can install then some other system of government. These guys, though, what they want to do is basically have a kind of a neo-monarchy or a tech monarchy. So their idea is not to replace capitalism with a decent, working class democracy or social democracy. Their idea is something more like a monarchy, I think. At least that's what they openly admit. So, yeah, whatever. So I think the idea for these people is that the neo-reactionaries, that is they want to create a real goods crisis by using the fakeness or the psychological fake fiscal crisis. They use the fiscal crisis as an excuse to create a real crisis. So a real crisis of supply and demand. Because, I think they know, who knows what's in their head, but I think they know that you can't ever have a true fiscal crisis. Fiscal crises are always fake. Right? 2008 was not a fiscal crisis. It was a crisis of households unable to pay mortgages and government not willing to bail out the mortgage holders. Instead, they managed to bail out the banks and everything. But, it was all done sort of backwards, ass backwards. So I think the aim of the neo-reactionaries and techno-monarchists is to use a fake fiscal crisis, and I think they know it's fake, relying on a mass of people getting duped by prevailing monetarist nonsense, in order to generate the real crisis that they actually really want to create. They want to create real austerity in order to install some sort of monarchy. Why is that nonsense? It's nonsense because, the pithy nonsenses that are often repeated are, my tax dollars are paying for it. The other common one is the government can't keep borrowing from our grandkids forever. Governments don't borrow from banks, they can't. I won't go into the nuances of that today. Anyway, even Richard Wolff will spout this taxpayer-funded nonsense. A lot of leftist YouTube, BreadTube, repeats this nonsense. Taxpayers' dollars paying for it. It's basically they're parroting Margaret Thatcher. I don't understand why they keep doing it. Why are you repeating right-wing myths? Please stop doing it, please. There's nothing more damaging, I think, than these otherwise nice Marxists and leftists stabbing us all in the back. Yeah, the point about this is that the reactionaries always need to generate working class austerity. They gain power by the welfare state. I don't think many lefties understand this. The reactionaries and right-wingers need people to need welfare. They want the welfare system. It's something they can complain endlessly about. It's like a political football for them. They keep inflating the issue. They create the need for welfare and they use it as a political football to bang people over the head with and to defeat so-called progressives who, one has to say, do not understand that there really is no need for welfare. You can always give people jobs, good, decent jobs for community purpose, and welfare is something else for people who maybe cannot work or who do not need to work or who can't easily contribute to their community. They need to be given some state welfare, but it can be pretty minimal. So it's not just enough that people understand MMT. We have to stop these reactionaries. We have to basically get rid of the monsters one way or another. And I think if this sort of intellectual violence, like, reading out these talking points, fails, then something like the pitchforks will have to be brought out. I really do think it might get to that point. I hope it doesn't. I want to quickly shout out to Ghost on the Half Shell. He has some good stuff about the drain of intellect from US universities. And I think that's also occurring in New Zealand, unfortunately. Where are these people going to? Goodness knows where, but it looks like some of us are going to Australia. The trouble is, Australia is also run by neoliberals, so they're kind of running out of the frying pan into the fryer. I don't know. It's just that I guess in New Zealand at the moment it's getting a little bit too extreme, so it's not good. Here's one of Ghost's videos, pretty good. He mentions the farmers here, and he's got some other content. It was a good one. This looks good. Deficits matter. The deficits do matter. It's about where does the government deficit go? Sorry, I'm not sure if you can see that on screen. Pull that in the middle here. This is a good one too. Killing the golden goose. It's about the US brain drain. So where was I? So yeah, I don't know. This brain drain, it can lead to some sort of social collapse. Although the people don't die, they just immigrate somewhere else. So I don't really know. It's hard to say how long or how damaging all this is going to be. It's kind of anyone's guess. But what I would always stress is simply that it's all needless, an incredible waste of human lives. Ironically, given that the Mars King's outfit is supposed to be government efficiency, in a very real sense, they're doing almost the opposite. They're making things more inefficient by unemploying people. There's nothing more inefficient than the government, having to give out welfare. They impose the need to earn the dollar, and if they just give it away for free, it doesn't serve any purpose. It's defeating the point of the system. And it's very similar when you unemploy people in the public service. You're asking them to go out and find a way to earn the tax credit. What are they going to do? Two things usually. They're going to rely on welfare, which is completely needless. Needless, as I said, if they are able to contribute to their community. They should be given a job guarantee instead. It's a much better option, higher pay, much more stable, and so forth. Or they're going to choose a bullshit job. Chances are one of these two. What's the chance that out in the private sector, under government-imposed austerity, you're going to find a really good, meaningful, purposeful job that is not bullshit or creating total crap? I mean, yeah, I don't know the numbers on this, but I think the chance of getting a bullshit job is pretty high these days. I mean, if most decent service jobs are already fully staffed and they can't make more sales, the firms, that is, cannot make more sales, then the only jobs left are going to be bullshit almost by definition. I might be wrong on that. You know, there might be some capacity in the economy for people to go further into credit debt, you know, to use their credit cards to drive a bit more demand if there's more people in the private sector to hire. But I don't think most civil service workers who were unemployed are really good at making pancakes or pizzas. So, you know, there's some nuances there to consider. I would say if 40% of jobs are already bullshit and you unemploy someone who's working in the public sector, chances are more than 40% that they're going to be finding some sort of bullshit job for a government, but not for a household. It's always and only the real goods and services crises that matter, never the fiscal crisis. There is no such thing for a government. So every so-called fiscal crisis is really a crisis of political false psychology. But don't be a dumb MMT reductionist. It's also true that the households never need to suffer a fiscal crisis. Why? Because the government should exist to protect the working class. And this means, we're talking now post-industrial revolution and automated farming and so forth, we really have an abundant economy. We produce way more stuff than people need, especially if we got rid of bullshit jobs and had people doing useful jobs. We live in an era of abundance. And this means that no household who is currently barely squeaking by basically subsistence living need ever exist. The existence of households who are struggling to survive in our time and age is a total abomination and a complete disgrace. That's all I've got for you today. Like I said, no fancy video effects for now. Blah blah, like and subscribe. I don't really care. You can drop me some donations on Ko-fi if you want. But really, I don't want to be paid to do this, because if you start demanding certain things from me, I'll start supplying, and that will take away my freedom to write whatever the hell I want. So I'd prefer to have that freedom and live in complete poverty. So as long as I've got some internet. Take care. Have a good quick postscript here. Count how many times I said bogeyman instead of boogeyman. How about how about this guy here? Warms the cockles of your heart. Here's a humble electrical engineer. Check his YouTube channel. It doesn't do anything except really geeky electrical engineering stuff, and yet he could not produce a video because politics is so concerning him. There's no isolation from politics when you're under neoliberalism. I mean, really, we are all politicians if we want to pretend we have a democracy and get involved in politics. But anyway, just wanted to mention that one. Also, well, I think in the video or in my Substack I mentioned it wouldn't be too bad to retire under the age of 40 or by the age of 40. Of course, that implies a whole lot of robots that also are cost effective, not using too much electricity, and also people living, you know, decent, humble lives, not guzzling too much electricity to produce a whole lot of garbage no one ever needs. So with those two caveats, yeah, I think we could all retire before the age of 40, definitely before the age of 50. Not only that, we could be working 3-hour days, 4 or 5 days a week. This is to emphasize David Graeber's magnificent point that 40% of jobs roughly are bullshit, which is a waste of human lives. Okay, hope you enjoyed that little postscript. No promises that I will keep producing these videos for content, but please share if you found it at all slightly educational or more educational than the usual stuff.